Lots of people ask whether we are already in the first stages of a World War III, but no, we're not. A World War III will be a global conflict, and we're nowhere near that at all at the moment. However, we are very much in the beginning of a militarized conflict in Europe.
In an era defined by geopolitical upheaval, a reassessment of European security is underway, driven by intelligence warnings and the specter of a resurgent Russia. The peace Europe has known for decades is no longer a given, and the race to secure its future is now underway. So let's find out what the true reality is. The issue of military spending by European Union and NATO member states has long been a point of contention, with U.S. political figures, including former President Donald Trump, consistently criticizing their financial commitments as insufficient. Now, with the war in Ukraine persisting into its fourth year, what was once a diplomatic critique has transformed into an urgent strategic imperative. A chilling alert was issued by the Danish intelligence service on February 11, 2025, which served as a public wake-up call. Their assessment presented a precise and alarming timeline for Russian military reconstitution. According to their analysis, once the conflict in Ukraine concludes, Russia would require a mere 6 months or less to prepare for a war against a neighboring state. The projection grew even more dire looking forward, suggesting that within 2 years, Russia could possess the capability to initiate a conflict in the strategically vital Baltic region. The most severe warning indicated that within a 5-year window, a direct attack on Europe could be possible under the critical condition that the United States would refuse to come to its allies' aid. These forecasts stand in direct contrast to official statements from Moscow, which consistently deny any expansionist desires toward Europe. However, the gravity of the situation was underscored on March 5th by French President Emmanuel Macron, who took direct aim at Russia's thriving war economy. He sounded a forceful alarm, stating that Russian aggression, in his view, knows no borders, thereby lending a powerful voice to the intelligence community's grim outlook and pushing European capitals toward a long-overdue mobilization of their defensive resources. In a decisive response to the escalating warnings, the 27 member states of the European Union collectively agreed to a monumental surge in military spending the very next day, with proposals outlining a nearly $1 trillion increase in defense outlays. This move, however, is not without its vocal detractors. Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, has emerged as a prominent critic, arguing that such large-scale rearmament is both impractical and fiscally irresponsible. He contends that the European Union, lacking a unified treasury and a parliament with robust federal power, is structurally ill-equipped to manage a venture of this financial magnitude. Instead of accelerating an arms buildup, Varoufakis advocates for a diplomatic path forward, proposing peace talks that would include both Russia and China, with the aim of securing a neutral and sovereign Ukraine while forging an entirely new European security architecture. As this fundamental debate over strategy continues, nations sharing a direct border with Russia are taking immediate and concrete measures for their own defense. Finland, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia have all caused significant international concern by formally withdrawing from the Ottawa Treaty, which bans the use of anti-personnel landmines, a stark signal of their perceived vulnerability and readiness to deploy all necessary defensive measures. Simultaneously, the private sector is beginning to brace for potential conflict. In a telling development, the port of Rotterdam, the largest in Europe, has begun reserving dedicated space for vessels carrying military supplies and is actively drafting contingency plans to reroute commercial cargo in the event that war disrupts the continent, illustrating how the drumbeats of geopolitical tension are now echoing through the halls of commerce and industry. A quiet, profound shift is taking place across the European continent, moving from high-level government chambers into the everyday lives of its 450 million citizens. In a recommendation that makes the geopolitical tension startlingly personal, national governments are now encouraging families to stockpile at least 72 hours' worth of essential supplies, including bottled water, canned food, and necessary medicine. This directive to prepare for potential disruption marks a significant moment in modern European history, transforming abstract security debates into a tangible household checklist. The collective psyche is increasingly occupied with a stark and ancient proposition, one famously articulated by the Roman writer Vegesius in the 4th or 5th century: Si vis pacem, para bellum, if you want peace, prepare for war. This centuries-old maxim now echoes through contemporary policy decisions, from trillion-dollar spending packages to the restructuring of critical infrastructure. As governments debate grand strategy and ports like Rotterdam recalibrate for military logistics, the individual citizen is being asked to participate in this vast project of preparedness. In this fragile calculus, the act of getting ready for the worst is seen as the surest path to preserving the peace that Europe has enjoyed for decades, a hope that rests on the belief that the Roman sage's wisdom will hold true once more. A profound and urgent transformation is sweeping across Europe as nations, confronted with a changed security landscape, embark on a historic and rapid mobilization not seen in generations. The catalyst for this shift is a growing apprehension regarding the future reliability of the United States as a security guarantor. Intelligence assessments from agencies in Denmark and Germany have set a stark timeline, warning NATO to brace for a potential attack within as little as 5 years. This ominous forecast has moved from strategic briefings into public policy, with many governments now advising their citizens to assemble survival kits in case of a major crisis. While the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the political return of Donald Trump have brought these fears to a head, analysts note that the heightened threat from Russia had been brewing for years, leaving Europe in a frantic game of catch-up after decades of reliance on American power. For the entirety of the post-World War II era, European security was underpinned by a simple, powerful guarantee from the United States, a promise enshrined in the NATO alliance that an attack on one member would be met with a collective response. That long-standing assumption is now being fundamentally challenged. President Donald Trump has explicitly stated that the continent can no longer take American military support for granted, expressing increasing sympathy for Russia, while warning the European Union that it must ultimately be responsible for its own future security. This has forced the EU into the difficult and urgent task of weaning itself from a decades-long dependency. As Luigi Scazzieri of the Center for European Reform observed, it simply proved more convenient to rely on the US. This new reality is manifesting in concrete and symbolic actions across the continent. Poland is planning to train its entire adult male population for war, while Germany has unlocked billions for a historic boost in defense spending. In a dramatic echo of the Cold War, Norway is restoring old military bunkers that have been deactivated for 40 years and has reinstated a requirement halted in 1998 for all new buildings over a certain size to include bomb shelters. Meanwhile, the nations most exposed to the Russian frontier, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, have taken the controversial step of announcing their withdrawal from the Ottawa Convention, banning anti-personnel landmines. These countries, which also share borders with Moscow's ally Belarus, argue that stockpiling and using landmines is paramount to giving their troops the flexibility needed to defend NATO's eastern flank, a clear signal that immediate territorial defense is now taking precedence over international weapons treaties in a newly precarious Europe. A continent that for generations enjoyed the peace dividend of the post-Cold War era is now grappling with the sobering logistics of preparing for a potential conflict, a shift embodied by the drastic measures of nations like Poland. Having spent nearly 2 centuries under the shadow of Moscow's dominance, Poland is now mobilizing its 38 million citizens for the possibility of combat, initiating work to ensure all men undergo military training with the ambitious goal of expanding its army to 500,000 troops. This drive for personnel highlights a central, worrying issue for European defense planners, as noted by security experts like Stefan Fruhling from the ANU's Strategic and Defense Studies Center, who points out that Europe simply lacks the forces necessary to hold extensive front lines. This concern is magnified by the sheer scale of the Russian military, which maintains about 1.5 million active troops and has just this week ordered a fresh conscription drive to recruit 160,000 more men, a move the Russian Defense Ministry insists is in no way connected to its ongoing operations in Ukraine. The urgency behind this European rearmament is a direct response to the scale of Russian preparations, which security analysts describe as being for an all-out continental war in the coming years. According to Jakub Janda from the Center for Security Policy in Prague, European countries are genuinely scared by the scope of these preparations, with the understanding that any ceasefire in Ukraine would simply start a countdown as Russia reorients itself for a potential campaign against NATO. This assessment is backed by official intelligence, including a recent update from the Danish Defense Intelligence Service, which warned that Russia could be prepared to wage war in Europe within a 5-year period, a timeline echoed in Germany. The core of the NATO alliance, its Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause, which treats an attack on one as an attack on all, is now seen as potentially being tested. Doesn't all of this really sound like European countries are preparing for WOR? Share your respectful perspectives in the comments below, and for more deep dives into the stories behind the news, make sure to subscribe.